to the Alchemy Cafe chat room where conscious conversations are created. We are sitting here with John Landis in Bayburger in fabulous, kind of snowy Sag Harbor today. We got a little bit of snow overnight. And John, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview with you is that you are such a known person in the community and you do so much. And I wanted to find out, actually, for my own curiosity, a little bit more about your background and how you got into being such a prominent person in this town. Now, I understand that you're an attorney.
Right.
I don't know if you're still practicing law, but I know you did that for many years. But what most people know you for here is your, I think, passion for music.
Right.
And as you can see behind us, the jam sessions on Thursday night. So tell us a little bit about where your interest in music started and kind of how this whole your involvement in
Well, I think like a lot of us, I'm a music lover. I'm not a musician. I do love music. I play music. I sing music, but I certainly don't consider myself a musician. And I think I've just always had kind of eclectic tastes and interests. I think back to the first time I heard live rock and roll, like in high school or before me. Before that, I was kind of a folkie. I was interested in folk music. I grew up in Scottsdale, in Arizona, and there wasn't much live music around, but there was some, because this was when I was coming of age, it was the early 60s, and so Peter, Paul, and Mary, and then Bob Dylan was coming along. But I remember being at a Martin Luther King speech in Phoenix, of all places, seeing, some people of color for the first time in Phoenix, in a gathering, and then Peter, Paul, and Mary were there. And so I have my recollections of Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day, this happens to me, are kind of mixed up with Peter, Paul, and Mary, which is nice. And then when I got into college, which was in Boston, I went to Harvard, there was a place called the Boston Tea Party that was like in an old church, and that was down in the basement, and saw The Dead and Rod Stewart and all these bands. It was just such a revelation. I mean, in some ways it's surprising that I didn't go in that direction. But met a girl, fell in love, got married relatively early, and then realized I needed a career. So I've always been a good writer and talker. Relatively, my father was a minister, so I grew up hearing him preach, at a church in Scottsdale, Presbyterian church. And he was an inspiration. So I'd gone to private school where you write all the time. So that was the direction I was going in. And so I went to law school, just almost on a whim. I do things frequently, although I'm a bit of a planner, I'm kind of analytical, but I also do things like on whims. Like my entire career was chosen relatively quickly. One of the guys I worked for was when I was an intern, so I interned, although it wasn't really like work-study law school, but I wanted to work anyway and make some money. So I put on my jacket, my little tie, and I worked for a couple guys, a couple law firms when I was in law school. One was a guy named Larry O'Donnell, Lawrence O'Donnell, whose son now is Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC. And he had sons, and they all went into law except for Lawrence, who wrote, and he also went to Harvard, younger than I. And so I was kind of inspired by them. But then I worked for a guy named Haskell Kassler, and he represented Don Law, and Don Law at the time had a place called the Club Paradise in Boston, where we would go frequently, and they were kind of the showcase rock and roll club. Again, having little to do with my career, but Don Law was represented by this guy who I was interning for, and he was also a friend. So I was like, Hacky, give me some work, man. I want to work on Don Law stuff. And interestingly, he wouldn't give up any of it, right? It's like if you have a really good client like that, you don't necessarily want some young, rock and roller to get his hands on it. Anyway, that's okay, Hacky. I forgive you. So I didn't gravitate into entertainment law, although I always kind of had an interest in it.
Well, I should mention, what I didn't mention earlier is that you are the chairman of our local public radio, WPTV, and you're also the founder of the Sag Harbor Music Festival. So this wasn't just some hobby.
Right.
You
Well,
just you're actually,
that's
you've
fun to
actually
talk about
taken,
that.
yeah, you've
Yeah.
actually taken it
Right.
and really.
Well, then I had, the thing is, Laura, then I had this long career that had little to do with the music business until I retired. And I ended up in a biopharmaceutical company, which is kind of a famous / infamous biopharmaceutical company because Martha Stewart was involved, so you guys probably know what it was. And anyway, the company did finally very well, and that was basically my career in law was mostly as a general practitioner, what they call a general counsel for in a corporate environment. We built the company, we eventually took it public, we built a huge manufacturing facility to grow this drug. We did, and this was largely to the credit of the founders, and I was really like their first employee. The founders were Sam and Harlan Waxon, who are kind of well known out here, at least at a certain time in their careers. In any case, when a lot of stuff went down with my company, I was kind of given the forced opportunity to retire early. It's a nice way to say that I lost my job. And that was in like 2001, 2002. So here we are in 2016. That was 14 years ago.
And you've already been living out in Sag Harbor then?
No, right around then, a couple of years later, we started to, well, no, right around then, I'm sorry. We looked for property out here just to have a home near the beach. We also looked at the Jersey Shore, East End of Long Island.
No comparison.
Like,
No question.
so, you know, so, and we had a lot of friends who were coming out here regularly. They always called it the country. We're going to the country. It's Friday afternoon. It's be noon. It was like, yeah, they're gone. Now we can play. They were like the chief executives. Yeah, so we found some property out here. We built a house. And then all this other stuff went down kind of around the same time. And it's like, well, I guess we'll move to the East End.
It's always interesting how people ended up out here.
Yeah, and that was a natural thing. And right at the same time, our daughter Liza and our son-in-law Joe Tremblay had gotten married. They were living in the city. They were interested in food. Both of them. They were just kind of starting out of college on their careers, and they clearly were foodies. And then Liza took like an ice cream making course. And Joe was working for all these different places, front of house, back of house in New York. And it was clear that they wanted to like do something in hospitality and restaurants. So we.
And this is their place.
Yeah, this is their place. Bay Burger is their place. And we said, well, how about starting a restaurant where we are out in the Hamptons in the East End. And so we've built this family business, which has been like a total pleasure. And along the line, I mean, I think what got me started in music out here was clearly Bay Burger, because like I've already said, I've always loved live music, and I wanted, since we had a place, to do some live music. And I said to Joe and Liza, could you give me one night? This was like back in 2007 or something. Give me one night, and I'll see if I can find some bands or some players. And we'll do it early, relatively early, and we thought it through, and we'll make it free, and just advertise it or promote a little bit, and which we did. And the first summer we did it, call it 2007, I think. Jim Turner was our first. Jim's like a local blues, folky,
Quirky.
vagabond, singer of 1,000 songs. And I remember Jim came in, and he's a very like energetic guy and really fun, and a storyteller. And he comes in, he says, "Well, I have to case out the environment. I have to see what it's like to do music here." And so he walks around, he looks at the bathrooms for some reason. He used one, and he said, "John, the greatest thing about this place is you've got nice, clean bathrooms."
Very important to the jazz and
But then the greatest thing is he walked over to the line where we cook, where we have our grill, and he listened to the fan, and he went, B flat.
Oh my God! Wow.
So he knew that he probably made that up.
Right? No, but that was great.
It was great, and he played for like 6 weekends in a row, way back when, 2007, and it was working out fine. And I thought, wow, we got our guy. And then he comes, he says, "John, that's it. I'm done." And I said, "Why, Jim?" We're having a great time. He said, "Well, I don't want to wear out my welcome, and I'm very cognizant of how these things affect my career. And it's all been great. I love it. I love the bathrooms. I love the B flat, and the line and from the fan. But I'm going to go out. So I scrambled, and I found some other people. A guy named Leroy Clavis, who's some people may know is kind of a folkie. He just recently left the community, but he played for a while, and then I ended up like scrounging for high school bands. I mean, like there was a band then called Too Busy Being Bored. You remember that?
No, right before my time.
Well, Too Busy Being Bored, they're still like only 30 years old.
And
this
they're still bored.
2007. They were like actually they were a high school band. And the guitar player was Spalding Gray's son, Forrest Gray. And Kathy Rousseau, his mother, helped him get gigs. And if they did a gig or like a fundraiser, I remember there was a fundraiser at Stephen Tonkhouse's one the first time.
You have like world-class jazz musicians.
We do. I mean, it's been a long
really
jump.
Evolved.
Yeah, but it's fun to think about how that started. And so we did that year with, and they would play, and other high school bands would play. And it was good and it was bad, but what I learned was if you find a local band or local players who have parents, most of these boys did, they all did, and extended families, we get the Pearson crowd in, or we get the Southampton High School crowd in. So it was a good way early on to kind of promote the restaurant and do fun stuff. But then after that first year, we met another local character out here who's got a family, and his name is Claes Brondal. You can see his name behind us. And he's a drummer, and he had a lot of jazz experience. He's a great jazz drummer, and he knows a lot of people, and he's building a career. And you can't really almost anywhere it's very difficult to make a career out of music alone, unless you have a certain echelon. And even then it's really hard. And so he was growing a family out here, and he came to Joe, who was his friend before me, and said, "What would you think of like doing some music at Baber?" And Joe said, "Well, talk to John, and we'll talk it up and see." So Claes's idea was to have a jam session, a jazz jam session, a la, late at night after the gigs are over in New York, the musicians get together and they just, play. The jazz musicians, which is kind of what jazz is about anyway. It's riffing, it's spontaneous, doing solos. And so Claes started the jam, and it was kind of, I would say it was like an instant success, but it was instantly like, that's going to be good. And the way the jazz jam session works is you get a core of musicians, 3, basically a drummer, a cordist, either guitar player or piano player, and a bass player. Stand-up bass in this case. And then other musicians show up. And over the 8 years that we've done this now, it's worked out very well because we get world-class people who come in.
The place is packed.
The place gets packed in the summertime. Right now it's not so packed on Thursday nights, but now that Bayburger's open all year long, we do it every Thursday night. So a couple years into that, even maybe the first year, Kelly Connaughton, who's now Kelly Connaughton Dodds. Kelly Connaughton, who's a woman who has experience in the music business. She worked for the Henry Mancini Foundation in California, and she'd also worked for the Grammys back east. Saw what we were doing, and she also saw that we had moved the jazz in the wintertime, same niche, Thursday night, 7 to 9, from here to Bay Street Theater in the lobby, because we were closed. Bayburger was closed. Now we're open in the winter. So we still do it here, but we've had occasions where we've been closed for periods of time in the winter, and we needed another venue. So it was a jam session. It wasn't the jam session at Bayburger, it was the jam session. We moved it 1 year to Wolfer, a couple years to Wolfer. The first time we moved it to Bay Street. And then Kelly got the idea that, having recently become a member of the Sag Harbor community herself, that this would be a good place to do a music festival. So the founder of the music festival is not me. I came on the board and I talked to her and helped her.
Here I'm thinking you're the founder.
I was there.
But you're very prominent.
I was there with her and loved her ideas. Was a sounding board. Went on the board right away, so I was the second board member along with her. She really is the moving force. Then so she's taken that, and now this year will be our 6th year.
And it's such an incredible event. I mean, just so people have an idea. It's like all the local little restaurants, little venues in town, and you can just, for the weekend, go and hear different bands throughout the day. And it's it's such a fabulous event that happens.
Right.
People come out, everyone loves it. They get to hear all the local musicians. So it's really become, one of the highlights.
And it also, it's a good, the jam session and the festival are emblematic of the appetite for music out here,
Right.
and the fact that there are so many musicians,
Yeah.
so many good musicians. And I often wonder, like, does Terre Haute, Indiana have like, a musical community that supports itself that are local? Where I don't know. I mean, it's certainly something about the fact that we're a resort community, and
And close to New York City, so you get
close to New York,
yeah.
But somehow there, and part of it is the radio station too. I really think.
So tell us about
think
that. You're the chairman of the local.
It's Peconic Public Broadcasting. It's 88.3. It used to be WLIU. It's 20 years old, but it's only been owned by all of us. That is it's always been a public radio station, but it was owned by a university, which is the case for most public radio stations,
Right.
or the lion's share in the U.S. But the trend over the past 10 or 15 years among some universities has been, well, do we really need this? Maybe we've got a college station of our own. The kids, doing stuff. Do we want to be supporting with our own finances to some degree a public radio station? So Long Island University made the calculation that they wanted to divest themselves of the radio station. So in 2009, the people, namely Wally Smith and Bonnie Grice and German and all these people who were still involved with the radio station, but when it was LIU, decided that they would go out and build a board and seek the money to buy the license, which LIU put up for bid, and keep the license, basically keep the station pretty much the same. So they had to build a local board, and I had been listening to Bonnie, and one of the things about Bonnie Grice, and this is still the case, very much so with the station, is that if you're interested in public life out here, and you listen to this radio station, by public life I mean like entertainment, culture, and the nonprofit community, and just kind of community events, that there's no better way to find out about them than to listen to her show in the morning, which is still 9 to 12, and has been even when it was LIU. So that is something that I listen to regularly and learned a lot about the local community from listening to. And
it's a
still
wonderful station, really.
Yeah.
Really great station.
So listen to Bonnie. She's also an actor, and she had done a couple things. There's a wonderful September festival out here called Harbor Fest that the Chamber of Commerce and others do every year, and there's usually some cultural events. And there was a play called 300 Stories, something like that, or 30 Stories. I can't remember, but it was a series of stories about Sag Harbor through the 17th century, the 18th century, I should say the 18th century, and 19th when it was a whaling town, and it's various. So there were maybe 4 stories, and each one was a separate period, and usually ended up with a fire, and the town, portions of the town burning down, and then being rebuilt, and then this was shown at the Old Whalers Church, which is such a fantastic venue, and in fact, it's where the music festival every Friday night, when we have a festival in late September, does its kickoff event.
Right.
So, and that taught me some about Sag Harbor history, and it's such a historical town. So I gravitated to the radio station. I helped them raise the money to buy the license, like a lot of people did. So I just networked with my friends. So I started emailing people and writing to people about the radio station, and just raising some money. But I hadn't really met Wally, who's the executive director, I think, until around that time, or maybe after. I was just helping them raise money, and putting some money in myself. So then Wally and I kind of became friends, and they needed a board, so I came on the board, brought some other people on the board, and I'm still helping build that board, build the station. And he's Wally Smith is, he's an old radio guy, and he won't mind me saying old, because he's older than me, and but he's like the Energizer Bunny, and he's just the station just fights its way along and still has some of pretty much the same on-air people that they had when they were at LIU, and German at night, Brian Cosgrove in the afternoon. So it's a mix of music and talk, NPR Talk, National Public Radio. We're the only NPR affiliate in all of Long Island, which is kind of amazing. And like I say, it's a great, in addition to being, having some excellent programming, it does a lot of service to the community because it makes this information available.
Well, before we wrap up, there's one other thing I want to ask you about, because I always like to do a little bit of research and kind of find it out, And one of the things that I saw was how you love sort of encouraging young entrepreneurs. You love working with young people. What's that about?
Oh, I'm glad you asked about that.
Was there somebody?
You're so intuitive. I mean, we've talked before, obviously, about things, but to me, I'm very close to my kids, and I'm very close to my wife and I are very close to our grandchildren, and I don't exactly know where it comes from, but I've always been a guy who just likes to get on his bicycle and not take off into the woods, or put on his tight clothes and bike like this. I like to get on my bicycle and ride into town, see what's going on. Like, my favorite time in the summertime is Friday evening when the jitney comes in and the 20-year-olds come in after working their butts off the week in New York, and they're ready to just enjoy the Hamptons, enjoy the weekend.
See, most of the locals
they got their luggage. I just to ride my bike in and just park it in front of the movie theater and just watch the jitney around. Well, that's where it would leave from. Across the street, American Hotel. And also the first volunteering I did out here was non-music related. It was Quail Hill Farm, which is in Amagansett, which is owned by the Peconic Land Trust, and the farmer is Scott Chasky. And if any of you guys haven't met Scott Chasky, you have to. He's an amazing guy, and he's been a mentor to a lot of young farmers. Because every summer they would bring in interns, and they like volunteers, but the farm really runs with the young farmers who get a stipend, and usually places to live, often provided by the Peconic Land Trust. And these kids are fantastic, and it's one of the only industries out here that is growing for young people. I mean, it's too expensive for so many kids who grew up here to stay here, so they move away, and we lose our young people in lots of ways. So to me, it's such a win-win if you can get young people to come into the community, let alone to keep the ones who are here.
Right.
And since food and farming and the environment have become such important parts of the lives of so many of us and young people, it was a natural way. So I volunteered there, and I met some of these kids, and then I did it another year, and I've never been on their board. My wife and I worked with Hillary Leff. Hillary Leff kind of arranged the dinner, and it was called the Common Table Dinner. It's in late August.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
You sit at this 60-yard long table. There's 250 people come. You pay about $200 for the dinner. It's one of the major funding events for the farm, which does get us, support from the land trust, but also raises some money to keep the farm going. So for years, I ran that auction. My wife and I, which meant meeting artists who would provide, canvases, photographers, or store owners who would give things that we could auction off. So it's what everybody does out here when you do a nonprofit event, different levels of success, and that became a successful. And that's one of the ways I met a lot of people too. So between Bayburger, radio station, working in food, with the
everybody,
farm,
John.
it's just so after a while, I got a pretty good Rolodex.
Yeah, you do, and everybody loves you because you're just so personable, and you come in here and you just get such wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm usually here on Thursday nights, and meet a lot of people here, and there's new people who are
Now
coming
you
in.
start
It's
coming back.
What do you do? And it's well, I clean up, but I also run the restaurant.
John, thank you so much for taking the time to be
it's
here
a
today.
pleasure.
This is so great, and I
Total
just
pleasure.
love all that you do for the community.
It's a great town.
Amazing.
It's a great town, and if we can find a way to keep you young people out here, get you settled in, come see me.
Yeah.
I'll try to help you.
I'll help you. Thanks so much, John. Thanks, everyone.